The International Monetary Fund said last week that this is now the worst global downturn we've seen since the Great Depression. And these are not people who lend themselves to superlatives. This is not a recession that is concentrated in any one place. For the first time since 1979, every one of the 50 U.S. states has a contracting economy at the same time. There are few industries that are spared. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data on what's been happening to job growth, two stand out as exceptions: the federal government for obvious reasons, and healthcare. But healthcare employment has been growing at a slower rate, and hospital employment now across the country, although not here, is declining, and I wouldn't be surprised if this keeps up, and even healthcare employment will tip down. People keep talking about industries being affected that were recession resistant, but they had in mind a recession something like the last couple we had, which were, by historical standards, relatively mild. Probably more alarming is that the consensus, the kind of mainstream forecast, is pretty gloomy. It's that the government tomorrow will tell us that the first quarter economy grew at shrank at a very substantial rate, maybe not as bad as the 6.5% in the fourth quarter, but not much better. Most economists expect the second quarter to be negative and think that maybe the economy will begin to turn into growth by the end of this year, but it will not be growing fast enough to bring down the employment rate until well into 2010. Unemployment is now 8.5%. That's the worst we've seen since the early 80s, and it's almost certain to hit 10% before this is over. We have seen a failure of almost every single check on the economic system. I'm sort of frustrated by some of the hunt for villains in this thing, although I think it actually serves a purpose to identify what went wrong. And I'm very supportive of these proposals that are now percolating in Congress to create a 9/11-like commission to kind of sort through the rhetoric and the charges and the countercharges to get some kind of diagnosis so that we have a chance of avoiding this again. But it is really a remarkable failure of everything from the management of America's largest financial institutions, who are practicing a kind of risk management that I think many of them believed was helping them to avoid the worst mistakes, and turned out that in many cases they were blind to the risks they were taking, or they did things that amplified the risks. We built institutions that turned out simply to be too big to manage. We built a regulatory apparatus that did not evolve as rapidly or anywhere near as rapidly as the markets did, so it was caught unawares. We had a system of making home mortgages that sort of lost its moorings, and influenced by a society-wide commitment that every American should own a house, decided that every American should have a mortgage, which is a little bit like saying every American deserves a hospital bed tonight, even if they're not sick. I mean, the fact is that there are a lot of Americans who shouldn't own a house. They can't afford to maintain a house, keep up a mortgage, they should rent. They should not be told that they're somehow economic failures because they're not leveraged up to the hilt. But we convinced them that they needed a house. A whole bunch of mortgage brokers were prepared to give them a mortgage, even if they had no prayer of paying it back. And a whole bunch of very sophisticated people decided that it was a good bet to buy that mortgage from the guy who made it, because after all, we all knew that house prices would go up forever. And if the people got into trouble, they could always refinance, or you could always take the house and it'd be worth more than the mortgage. And then we had a government being largely influenced to a great degree by Alan Greenspan, who said that this is the kind of thing that regulation really is not well equipped to stop. And as long as you have a lot of people who have money in the game, they'll police the poker table. And it turned out that was just wrong. And Greenspan did this remarkable mea culpa in front of Henry Waxman. Why someone who thinks that they screwed up would confess to Henry Waxman? That's a little bit beyond me. And he said as much. He said, my worldview was wrong. I thought that if the big sophisticated money was in the game, that they would take care of themselves, and instead they endangered the whole system. And this has produced something which is very unusual in the recent economic history. A recession that is caused not by some oil shock or central bank raising interest rates to fight inflation, but by a bubble bursting, a financial bubble bursting, first the housing bubble and then this sort of credit bubble where everybody thought that they should borrow more and everybody else thought they should lend more. And it's synchronized around the world. what seemed in the beginning to be a made in America problem and is now a global problem. There are very, very few countries that are doing better this year than last year, and there are many countries that are doing really poorly. And so when you have a synchronized global recession caused by a financial bubble bursting, you end up with a very virulent recession. This recession in the United States began in December 2007, so we're well into the second year of it. We haven't had a recession that lasted this long since the Great Depression. I mean, we had some concern at the Wall Street Journal that we were making things worse by overdoing the superlatives, but I think it's sort of, we had to abandon that concern because the superlatives were just simply reciting the facts. And so the other day, as Richard and I were talking earlier, I tried to think a little bit about where are we going, what are the outcomes. And one of the reasons this is very much suited to the journalistic thing is that the experts don't have much recent history to go on. If this recession was like the last 6 recessions, then some economic model could, based on the past data, could project reasonably accurately what was going to happen. But when you have a once every 70-year event, the kind of forecasting based on recent past is just misleading, which is why so many of the forecasters were totally blindsided by this, because their models didn't incorporate anything like what we had seen. And so the shorthand for thinking about where we're going is to use the shape of letters in the alphabet. There's the V, which is the deep recession followed by a quick rebound. There's the W, which is the recession followed by a rebound, maybe caused by government stimulus, and then a relapse to recession before we recover. There's the U, which just takes a longer time to get through this thing. There's the L, which is the economy stops shrinking, but it bumps along the bottom for a long period of time. Maybe the bottom of the L is upward slope, so it's not getting worse, but it doesn't get better very fast. And then there's the big D, the depression, which the shape of the letter doesn't explain it, but the word certainly does.